The spotlight was so bright it almost hurt to watch, but I couldn't look away. My husband, Richard, stood on stage holding the Architect of the Year award, a trophy I'd dreamed of for him for decades. I sat clutching my napkin at table 12, my smile feeling like a mask. "I have to thank the real genius," he said, and my heart gave a stupid little jump. "The visionary who brought this entire museum to life. Miss Schuyler Vance." The room erupted in applause. He pulled his 5-year-old designer onto the stage with him, calling her his muse. And me? His wife of 30 years, the woman who'd sketched out the original structural theories he built his entire career on? I wasn't even an afterthought. That public erasure was the end, but the foundation had been crumbling for years. That crumbling foundation had a sound. It was the sound of the tires humming on the freeway, the only noise in the car on the way home from the gala. Richard was scrolling through his phone, bathed in its blue light, probably reading the first glowing articles about his win. I just watched the city lights smear past the window. We pulled into the driveway of the house he had designed, the house that had been featured in magazines. It was our home, but it never felt like mine. It was an architectural statement, all glass, poured concrete, and cold steel, a place where furniture felt like a temporary interruption. There wasn't a single soft edge, not one cozy corner. It was a house built to be photographed, not lived in. He went straight to his study. "Big day tomorrow, Ellie. Need to prep for the Milan call," he said over his shoulder. "Already gone." The door clicked shut. I was left standing in the cavernous living room, the silence of the house rushing in to replace the sound of the engine. The only light came from the track lighting above the fireplace, a fireplace that was never used. It was a black, rectangular hole in the wall, and on the custom-built floating walnut shelf above it were his awards. I ran my fingers over the latest one, the big one, Architect of the Year. It was already there. His assistant must have had a duplicate delivered. It was heavy, all sharp angles and cold metal. Next to it was the Pritzker, the AIA gold medal, and a dozen others, all lined up like soldiers. I picked up a small crystal obelisk from 10 years ago, Excellence in Urban Design, and polished a fingerprint off it with my sleeve. This was my job now. I was the curator of his legacy, the polisher of his pedestals. "Hey, Mom. You're home." I turned. My son, Leo, was leaning in the doorway, backpack slung over one shoulder. He was 24, a recent architecture grad, and he'd just started as a junior designer at his father's firm. He had Richard's eyes and lately Richard's casual distance. "Hey, honey, working late?" "Yeah, just trying to get the new renderings for the airport proposal finished." He dropped his bag by the door and walked over, grabbing an apple from a minimalist wooden bowl. "So, how was the gala? Dad win?" "He did," I said, my voice flatter than I intended. "Architect of the Year." "Awesome." His face lit up, a genuine, uncomplicated flash of pride. "That's so great for the firm. Schuyler must be totally thrilled." I stiffened, my hand still on the crystal award. "She was. Your father." He brought her on stage. "No way," Leo beamed, completely missing the chill in my voice. "That's so cool of him. I mean, she deserves it." Her designs for that museum atrium. "Mom, they're next level." He started pacing, energized, gesturing with his hands as he talked. The way she used the cantilevered glass to support the roof, it's insane. It's like the whole thing is floating. "It's the future. The future." As he said the word, the cold, sterile room around me dissolved, and for a split second, I was somewhere else entirely. I was 30 years old, in a warm, wood-paneled lecture hall at the university, chalk dust on the sleeve of my blazer. The room was packed, students were sitting in the aisles. I was at the blackboard, sketching, my hand moving fast as I drew the exact load-bearing principles for a cantilevered glass structure. A young, hopeful Richard sat in the front row, watching me like I was the only person in the world. The slide projector clicked, showing the title of my thesis, Project Ethel, Structural Honesty in Public Spaces. My theory, my work, my idea. The one I'd put in a box in the attic when Leo was born, the one I'd given to Richard when he was struggling with his first big commission, saying, "Here, just use this, I don't have time." And she's doing it all with sustainable sourcing. Leo was saying, pulling me back to the present. "It's not just pretty, it's important. Preservation is important too, Leo." I said, the words sharp. It's about respecting the foundation, understanding where those ideas came from. Leo actually laughed. Not a mean laugh, just an unthinking, condescending little chuckle, the kind you give a well-meaning relative who just doesn't get it. Yeah, I know, Mom. And that old stuff you used to do it's classic. It's cool. He took a bite of his apple. But this is different. You wouldn't really get it. This is bleeding edge. This is real-world application, not just theory from a textbook. Skylar, she's a true visionary. A visionary. The word hit me like a slap. That's what Richard used to call me. I looked at my son, this boy I had stayed up with through fevers, this boy I had taught to ride a bike, this boy whose college application essays I had basically written, and he was looking at me like I was a relic, a faded photograph. He saw me as a historian, a keeper of things that were dead and gone. In his mind, I was the person who took care of the house and organized the dinner parties. I was the one who reminded his father to take his blood pressure medication. I wasn't the woman who'd taught his father half of what he knew. I turned back to the shelf and gave the Crystal Award one last, firm polish. Well, you should probably get to bed, I said, my voice perfectly even. You've got a big day tomorrow, working on the future. Yeah, I do. Night, Mom. He tossed the apple core into the trash and headed upstairs, his footsteps fading. I stood there for a long time, just looking at the row of empty pedestals, polished and gleaming under the spotlight. I realized that for 20 years, I hadn't been building a family. I'd been building a museum to my husband, and I was the only one who knew the exhibits were fakes. And in the week that followed the gala, I became the world's best curator of that fake museum. Life clicked back into its sterile, predictable rhythm. The unspoken rule in our glass and steel house was that we never discussed the unpleasant. We didn't talk about the gala. We didn't talk about the fact that Richard had publicly given his Muse, Skylar, credit for a career I had helped build. We just didn't. Instead, we talked about the weather. We talked about the stock market. We talked about the upcoming Milan trip. Ellie, have you seen my gray suit? He called from the master bedroom, the sound echoing down the limestone hallway. I was in the kitchen, watching our obscenely expensive, built-in espresso machine hiss and spit out his morning latte. It's back from the cleaners. I put it in your travel bag. I called back. I placed the latte, his morning cocktail of vitamins, and his blood pressure medication on a small tray and carried it to him. This was the ritual. For 30 years, I was the stage manager for his life. I made sure the props were in place, the lighting was right, and his lines were learned. He was standing in front of his closet, a vast walk-in space with its own climate control, scrolling through his phone. He didn't look up when I set the tray down. Thanks. Did the Milan contracts come in? The courier dropped them off last night. They're in your briefcase, I said, zipping up the side pocket of his suitcase. Richard, did you remember to refill this? I held up his small plastic pill organizer. The little box for Thursday was empty. He waved a dismissive hand, finally looking up from his screen. I'm fine, Ellie. I've been a little stressed, that's all. My pressure is fine, the doctor said. I know what the doctor said, he snapped. I don't need another historian managing my health. I've got Skylar and Leo handling the Milan presentation. The last thing I need is to be babied. His words hit their mark, as always. Historian, the keeper of dead things. I stopped, my hand still on his suitcase. The leather felt cold. I suddenly remembered packing for our honeymoon, shoving t-shirts and sunscreen into a beat-up canvas duffel bag in our tiny, sun-filled apartment. He had come up behind me, wrapped his arms around my waist and kissed my neck. God, Ellie, you are so brilliant, he'd whispered. You're going to change the world. I looked at the man in front of me, his face illuminated by the glow of his phone, his brow furrowed as he read an email. That man was gone. He'd been gone for a long, long time. Don't forget your vitamins, Richard, I said, my voice flat. I turned and walked out, leaving him to his world. The call came 2 days later. He was in Milan. I was in the pantry, doing the most mundane thing in the world, taking inventory. I was making a shopping list for Costco. Quinoa, check. Almond milk, check. Paper towels. We were running low. The house phone rang. No one ever called the house phone. It was a sterile white object mounted on the wall, part of the smart home system. I let it ring. It went to voicemail. A second later, my cell phone, sitting on the granite countertop, buzzed. It was an international number. I wiped my hands on my jeans and picked it up. Hello? Mrs. Eleanor Vance. The voice was male, with a heavy Italian accent. Formal. Yes, this is she. Mrs. Vance, this is Giuseppe Rinaldi. I am the general manager of the Hotel Principe in Milano. I am afraid I have some very difficult news. I stood there, staring at the bag of quinoa in my hand. The pantry smelled faintly of dried spices and cardboard. The world just stopped. The words he said next were polite, clinical, and utterly devastating. A cardiac event. In his room. The hotel doctor was called immediately. I am so very sorry, Mrs. Vance. He passed away before the ambulance arrived. I said thank you. I actually said thank you, as if he'd just told me my dry cleaning was ready. I hung up the phone. I stood in the kitchen. The refrigerator hummed. The air conditioning clicked on with a soft whoosh. Richard was dead. My husband of 30 years was gone. My first thought, the one that cut through the fog like a shard of ice, was not about grief. It wasn't about love. It was the firm. Our entire life, our retirement, Leo's future. Everything was tied up in Vance architecture, and Richard was the sole creative and financial head. He was the firm. I was horrified at myself. My husband was dead. I should be on the floor. I should be screaming. I should be feeling something besides this cold, hollow dread that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with liquidity. I had to call Leo. That was the next step. I dialed his number. He was at the firm. He picked up on the second ring, his voice bright, energetic. Hey, Mom, I'm swamped, sitting here with Sky. We're just mapping out the new airport lobby. What's up? Leo, I said, and my voice must have been a ghost because his tone changed instantly. Mom? What? What's wrong? Leo, it's your father. He was in Milan. He had a heart attack. Honey, he's gone. The sound he made. It wasn't a word. It was a raw, animal wail of such pure, uncomplicated pain that it finally broke my spell. That was grief. That was what a son was supposed to sound like. He was sobbing, No, not Dad, not Dad. He was home in 20 minutes, his face wrecked, his eyes hollow. He collapsed onto me, this 6-foot-tall man, my son, and he cried into my shoulder like he was 6 years old again. I held him tight, stroking his hair, murmuring the empty, stupid words, I know, and it's okay, and I'm here. But as I held my shattered son, my mind was racing, cold and clear. The historian was gone. The wife was in shock. But the woman who'd graduated top of her class in finance and structural theory, the woman who'd built the original financial models for the firm before she was erased, she was wide awake. Later that night, long after Leo had cried himself to sleep in his old bedroom, I sat in the cold, dark living room. The house had never felt more like a tomb. I was a widow, and I was completely, utterly alone. The fog of shock was still there, but underneath it, a cold, sharp anxiety was creeping in. What was in the partnership agreement? What had Richard signed? And what exactly was Skylar's role now? The question of Skylar's role was a cold, hard knot in my stomach that sat there through the entire surreal blur of the funeral. That week was a parade of muted sympathies and casseroles. So many casseroles. Neighbors and colleagues I hadn't seen in years appeared at my door, holding foil-covered dishes, their faces, masks of practiced grief. He was a great man. They'd murmur. He's in a better place, they'd say. I'd nod, take the dish, and thank them. The house filled with the smell of other people's cooking. Skylar was at the funeral, of course. She wore a perfectly tailored black dress, her face a portrait of tragic, youthful beauty. She sobbed quietly into a handkerchief, and I watched people, my friends, Richard's colleagues, go up to her, touch her arm, and offer comfort. Leo, my son, barely left her side. He seemed to be holding her up, his arm around her waist as she leaned into him, the two of them a perfect, grieving couple. I was the outsider, a stiff, dry-eyed statue in the front row, the historian, watching the new guard mourn. A week later we were in the lawyer's office. Mr. Harrison's firm was on the 40th floor, an old money establishment with dark mahogany walls, leather-bound books that looked like they'd never been read, and a view of the city that made everything look small. The air smelled of furniture, polish, and old paper. Leo sat next to me, his knee bouncing with nervous energy. And then, the door opened, and Skylar walked in, followed by her own lawyer. My blood went cold. "What is she doing here?" I asked, my voice low. Mr. Harrison adjusted his glasses. "Miss Vance was a key partner in the firm, Eleanor. Richard felt it was appropriate she be here for the reading of the relevant documents." Leo shot me a look. "Be nice, Mom." I shut my mouth, my hands gripping the leather arms of the chair. Harrison cleared his throat and opened the first folder. "We'll begin with the personal will signed 15 years ago." It was simple, exactly what I'd expected. The house, the personal checking and savings, the art collection, the cars, all to my beloved wife, Eleanor Vance. I felt a tiny, guilty puff of air leave my lungs, a small relief. The house was safe. My home was safe. Leo nodded, as if to say, "See, it's fine." Then, Mr. Harrison set the will aside. He picked up a second, much newer document, bound in a crisp blue cover. "And now," he said, his voice dropping into a monotone, "we address the matter of Vance Architecture, LLC." This was it. Richard filed an amended and restated partnership agreement 6 months ago. He paused, looking over his glasses at me. "It appears he restructured the firm's ownership." I felt Leo sit up straighter. "Restructured? What do you mean?" Harrison began to read. "Pursuant to Article 4, Section 2, in light of her invaluable and ongoing creative contributions, and to secure the firm's future, 51% of all shares and controlling interest are hereby transferred to Miss Skylar Vance, who will also assume the role of CEO and creative director, effective immediately." The words just hung in the air. 51%. 51%. It wasn't a stake. It was the entire kingdom. I couldn't feel my hands. I looked at Leo. His face was pale, his mouth slightly open. He was in shock. But Harrison wasn't done. Furthermore, a 15% junior partnership stake is granted to my son, Leo Vance, contingent upon his continued full-time employment with the firm under the leadership of Miss Vance. A gasp tore out of Leo. It was a small, wounded sound. I saw it instantly. It wasn't a gift. It was a leash. It was a pair of golden handcuffs, chaining my son to the woman who had just stolen our entire legacy. I was left with nothing. The house. An empty, sterile concrete box. The firm I had co-founded, the firm I had named, the firm built on the foundation of my intellectual property, was gone. Skylar finally broke the silence. She reached across the table and placed a perfectly manicured hand on my arm. Her touch was light as a spider web, and just as cold. "Eleanor, Leo," she whispered, her eyes glistening with perfectly managed tears. "I know it's a lot. Richard and we talked about this for months. He was so worried about his legacy. He wanted to ensure the firm was in hands that understood the future." She looked at Leo, her voice full of soft, tragic steel. "Leo, your father believed in us. He believed in our vision. I will do everything in my power to honor that." Leo, my son, numb and reeling. I nodded. He actually nodded, and placed his hand over hers. I said nothing. I felt nothing. The grief, the shock, it was all gone, burned away by a cold, white-hot clarity. My mind was no longer a widow's. It was an auditor's. It was clicking, like a machine, through dates. 6 months ago. What happened 6 months ago? The gala, the Architect of the Year award, and the Milan contract. The biggest, most lucrative project of Richard's entire career. I looked at Harrison. "The signature date," I said, my voice hoarse. "When exactly did he sign this?" Harrison, avoiding my eyes, pushed the signature page across the desk. I didn't even need to look. I already knew. October 27th, the day after the Milan contract was approved. I stood up. The leather chair squeaked in the silence. Leo and Skylar looked up at me, a perfect picture of generational betrayal. I was the historian, and I had just been locked out of my own museum. I walked out of that lawyer's office and didn't say a word. I just walked. I walked through the marble lobby, past the security desk, and out onto the street, where the wind was sharp and smelled like exhaust. I was locked out. The words echoed in my head. Locked out, locked out, locked out. I don't remember the elevator ride down. I don't remember getting in my car. But I must have, because suddenly I was on the freeway, driving, and Leo was in the passenger seat next to me, silent. The car, a luxury sedan Richard had bought me for my 50th birthday, was tomb quiet. I glanced at my son. His hands were clasped so tightly in his lap his knuckles were white. He was staring straight ahead, his jaw working. He wasn't grieving his father anymore. He was calculating his future. "Leo," I said. My voice sounded strange, like it was coming from far away. He didn't turn his head. "Don't, Mom. Just not right now." She stole it, Leo. I kept my eyes on the road, my voice a flat monotone. That agreement was signed the day after the Milan contract. That's not a partnership, that's a heist. He finally looked at me, and his eyes were cold. It was like Richard was staring back at me. "What do you want me to say?" He signed it. "It's legal." "Legal doesn't mean it's right." He gave her 51%. He left his wife with nothing and his son on a leash. "Don't you see what that is?" "He bought your loyalty to her." "He gave me a partnership," he snapped, his voice cracking. "He gave me a future. It's what I've always wanted." "What? I'm supposed to throw that away?" "For what?" Your pride." "My pride?" "Leo, that firm was my concept. The financial models, the business plan. I wrote them at our kitchen table while you were asleep in your high chair. That's not pride. That's fact." He was quiet for a long moment. We took the exit ramp, the car slowing, the engine humming. "It doesn't matter, Mom," he said, his voice weary, defeated. "It's done. What's the point of fighting it? It makes everything ugly." He got out of the car and went straight to his room. I was left standing in the cold, cavernous living room, alone with Richard's awards. I had lost my husband. I had lost my legacy, and now I was losing my son. I couldn't sleep. I just sat in the dark, watching the headlights from the street sweep across the concrete walls. Ugly. He thought fighting for my life's work was ugly. The next day, I did something I hadn't done in 20 years. I drove to the firm. I walked through the brushed steel and glass doors, and the receptionist, a young woman I didn't recognize, with pink hair, looked up, startled. "Can I help you, ma'am?" "Ma'am, I'm here to see Leo Vance," I said. The open plan office was buzzing. It was different now. The old, warm drafting tables were gone, replaced with rows of gleaming white workstations and massive monitors. Young designers, all looking like clones of Skylar, were clicking and dragging, headphones on, and in the corner, in Richard's old office, the one with the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see her, Skylar. She was leaning over a set of plans, laughing with two men in suits. She looked up, saw me, and her smile didn't waver. She just gave me a small, polite, dismissive little wave. I felt a cold rage I had never known I possessed. I found Leo at his station. He was staring at his screen, his face drawn. He saw me, and his expression hardened. "Mom, what are you doing here? You can't just be here. This is my firm, Leo. At least it was." I kept my voice low, but it was shaking. "We need to talk. We need to fight this." He stood up and grabbed my elbow, steering me into a small, glass-walled conference room. "Mom, stop. You're making a scene." "I don't care about a scene." The words exploded out of me. "He stole my work, Leo. Not just the firm, my work. The museum. That visionary atrium, that was mine. That was Project Ethel. That was my graduate thesis. He took it. He built his name on it, and then he gave it to her." I was breathing hard. I had finally said it. The secret I had kept, the exhibit I had curated for 30 years. Leo just stared at me. There was no shock, no horror, just a deep, profound, and bottomless pity. "Mom," he said, his voice soft, like he was talking to a child. "Please stop. You're grieving. You're lashing out." "I am not lashing out. I am telling you the truth. Go to the attic. In the blue trunk. My thesis. Project Ethel. It's all there." He sighed and ran his hands through his hair. He looked so much like his father. "So what if he did? So what if he was inspired by some old college paper you wrote? He's the one who built it. He's the one who made it real. You were here, making sure the house was clean. That was it. That was the dull, final blade. "You're a historian." "Mom," he said, his voice firming up, the pity replaced by a cold resolve. "You live in the past. You're obsessed with who gets credit for things that happened decades ago. Skylar, me, we're the new guard. We're looking at the future." "The new guard," I whispered. "She's 25 years old and you're her junior partner." "Yes," he said, his voice rising. "And it's my future. Dad knew you'd be like this. He knew you'd try to hold on, that you'd make it ugly. He protected the firm. He protected me. He was redrawing the family tree just like Richard, and I wasn't on it. I won't let you ruin this for me, Mom," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I won't, not just because you're bitter. There was nothing left to say. He had made his choice. He had chosen the future. He had chosen the lie." I turned and walked out of the conference room. I walked past his workstation. I walked past the row of young, bright-faced designers who were all staring at me. I walked past Richard's office, where Skylar was watching me, a tiny, triumphant smile on her face. I walked out the glass doors, into the cold afternoon air, and I had never, in my entire life, been so completely and utterly alone. I had lost my husband, I had lost my legacy, and now I had lost my son. I was no longer a wife. I was no longer a partner. I wasn't even, it seemed, a mother. I was just a historian, and I was standing in the ruins of my own life. Ruins. That's what the house felt like when I drove back. Not a home, but a mausoleum. A cold, empty monument to a life that was a lie. I walked into the cavernous living room. The silence was absolute. I looked at the shelf of Richard's awards, those cold metal symbols of my erased work. I looked at the photos on the wall, Leo's first day of school, our trip to the Grand Canyon, all curated memories of a family that had just been publicly dissolved by its own members. My son thought I was bitter, a relic, a historian, obsessed with the past. He was right. I was a historian, but he'd forgotten what a historian actually does. A historian doesn't just dust off old things. A historian researches. A historian finds the primary source. A historian knows exactly where the bodies are buried. The strange thing is, I didn't cry. The tears I'd been choking back for days, for years, were just gone. The numbness had receded, but it wasn't sadness that replaced it. It was something else. It was cold. It was quiet. It was the sharp, clean feeling of a lock clicking into place. My feet moved on their own. I didn't go to the master bedroom, which still smelled faintly of his cologne. I didn't go to the kitchen to pour the glass of wine I probably deserved. I went to the small, steel staircase at the end of the hall, the one hidden behind a flush panel door, the one that led to the attic. Richard had hated the attic. It was the one part of the house I'd refused to let him modernize. It wasn't climate-controlled. It wasn't sleek. It was hot. It smelled of cedar and old paper, and it was filled with the real history, packed away in cardboard boxes. I pulled the chain for the single bare bulb. Dust motes danced in the weak yellow light. There it was. Christmas decorations, Leo, schoolwork, my parents' things. I moved past them, to the far corner, under an old canvas dropcloth. A heavy, dark blue footlocker, the kind you take to college. On its side, written in my own, neat, 5-year-old handwriting on a piece of masking tape, were 2 words, academic archives. I hadn't opened this trunk in 20 years. Not since Leo was a toddler and I'd officially traded my career for motherhood. I'd packed away Eleanor Vance, Ph.D., to become Ellie, the supportive wife. The metal clasps were stiff. They groaned in protest, loud in the silence before snapping open. I lifted the heavy lid. The smell that rose up was my own personal history. It was the smell of university libraries, dried ink, and potential. It smelled like me. It was all there. My old faculty ID, the one with the short hair and the annoyingly confident smile. Bundles of lecture notes, tied with faded red string. Textbooks with every margin filled with my frantic, excited scribbles. And at the bottom, 2 things. The first was a heavy, rolled-up tube of drafting paper. My hands were steady as I picked it up. The rubber bands holding it were so old they were brittle. They snapped and crumbled in my fingers. I unrolled it on the dusty floorboards. Project Ethel, Structural Honesty in Public Spaces. My graduate thesis, my masterpiece. The ink was still dark, the lines, drawn by my own hand, sharp and precise. And there it was, the atrium. The unique, load-bearing cantilevered glass supports. The floating roof. The exact structural design that had just won my husband Architect of the Year for the new museum. The hot, dusty attic dissolved. I was 28, back in our first tiny, pre-Leo apartment, the one with the slanted floors. Richard was leaning over my drafting table, the plans spread out just like this, lit by a cheap desk lamp. He ran his hand over the paper, almost reverently. He looked at me, and his eyes, God, his eyes were so full of awe back then. "Ellie," he'd whispered, his voice thick. "Ellie, it's not just good, it's genius. You're going to change the world with this." I blinked, and I was back on the attic floor. The air was dry and still. "You're going to change the world," I whispered to the empty room. "Or, you'll just give it to your husband so he can." My hands were shaking now, but not with sadness. It was a cold, electric hum. I rolled the blueprints back up. Underneath them was the second item. A small, black plastic rectangle. A clunky, external hard drive from the late 92nds, the kind that needed its own power cord. On its side was a Dymo label. Archive. Master. I'd forgotten it even existed. This was from before the cloud. Before everything was connected. This was a digital time capsule. I had backed up everything from my university computer before I left. My thesis. My research. My notes. My original financial models. My entire academic and professional identity. I stood up, dust on my knees. I wasn't a ghost. I wasn't a relic. I wasn't a historian in my son's dismissive, pitying voice. I was an archivist. And I had the original manuscript. I picked up the hard drive. It felt heavy in my hand, heavy as a weapon. I walked down the steel stairs, out of the heat and dust of the past, and into the cold, sterile, modern living room. I walked right past Richard's row of awards. I didn't even look at them. I went into his study, my study now, and sat in his $5,000 ergonomic chair. I set the old, clunky hard drive on the sleek glass desk. It looked ancient. I had to rummage through a drawer of his junk to find the right power cord and a USB adapter, but I found them. I plugged it in. The computer chimed, recognizing new hardware. A small motor inside the old drive whirred to life. And after 30 agonizing seconds, a small gray icon popped up on the desktop. Archive. The sleeping giant was awake. I double-clicked the icon. My heart was hammering, a dry, fast beat against my ribs. A small window opened, revealing a list of files that hadn't been seen by human eyes in 2 decades. It was a digital ghost. My ghost. The file names were simple. Stark. Thesis. Final. Draft. PDF. Structural. Calcs. Appendix. XLS. Research. Notes. Ethel. Doc. Financial. Models. Firm. V1. XLS. My fingers trembled just once as I moved the mouse. I clicked on Thesis, Final, Draft, PDF. It opened instantly. The title page was stark white. Project Ethel. Structural Honesty in Public Spaces. And my name, right under it. Eleanor Vance. I scrolled down, past the introduction, past the theory, until I hit the technical drawings, and there it was. My black and white, academic, meticulously drawn CAD blueprint of the atrium. The cantilevered supports, the load-bearing calculations for the glass, the floating roof concept. The file date, in the corner of the PDF reader, read, the 1st of May, 1998. I took a deep breath. It felt like the first clean breath I'd taken in a month. I opened a new browser window on the giant, curved monitor. The screen was so wide it felt like a command center. I typed, Vance Architecture Museum Atrium. The search results exploded. Architect of the Year, a visionary triumph, Schuyler Vance's genius. I clicked on the Architectural Digest article, the one from the gala. It was filled with stunning, high-resolution photos. I found the one I was looking for, a wide-angle shot of the atrium, the one that had been on the screen at the awards show. I dragged the browser window to the right side of the screen. I dragged my 1,998 PDF to the left, and I just looked. The silence in the study was absolute, broken only by the quiet hum of the computer. On the left was my work, Academic, raw, black and white. The bones. On the right was their work. Sleek, modern, wrapped in shimmering glass and titanium. The skin, they were identical. It wasn't just similar. It wasn't inspired by. It was a direct carbon copy theft. They had taken my exact structural drawings, my calculations, my load-bearing points, my unique engineering solution, and just dressed it up in a fancy 21st century outfit. The visionary design that had won Richard his last greatest award, the one Skylar was claiming as her Muse-like genius, it was nothing but a high-tech tracing of my 20-year-old college paper. My son's words echoed in my head. "You wouldn't really get it, Mom. It's next level. She's a true visionary." I felt a laugh bubble up, cold and sharp. I had to put my hand over my mouth to stop it. They hadn't just stolen from me. They had stolen from me and then mocked my intelligence for not being visionary enough to understand my own work. I clicked on another file from the hard drive. Research, notes, Ethel, doc. It opened. It was pages and pages of my own words. My theories on structural honesty and how a building support system should be its primary aesthetic. I opened another browser tab. I found a video interview with Skylar from last month. She was on a panel, looking confident and brilliant. The moderator asked her about her philosophy. I listened, my blood turning to ice, as my own words, my own phrases, spilled from her mouth. "I just believe," she said, leaning into the microphone, "that true modernism is about, well, it's about structural honesty. It's about letting the building support system become its primary aesthetic." She'd stolen my work, and then she'd stolen my voice. The white-hot rage I'd felt at the firm was gone. This was different. This was a cold, surgical precision. This was the historian finding the primary source, the auditor finding the cooked books. I stood up. The house was pitch black around me. I walked into the dark kitchen and, without turning on the lights, I made a pot of coffee. The machine's gurgle was loud in the silence. I opened the cabinet and my hand brushed past the delicate china cups. I reached past them, to the back, and grabbed the one I'd bought at a garage sale years ago when Leo was in kindergarten. A cheap ceramic mug. On the side, in bubbly, cheerful letters, it said, "World's Best Mom." I poured the black coffee into it and walked back to the study. I sat down in Richard's chair. This wasn't a hunt anymore. This was an autopsy. I opened a new blank document. I typed at the top, "Evidence, Vance v. Vance." My fingers flew across the keyboard. I took screenshots. I put my 1998 blueprint next to their 2024 press photo. I put my 1998 research notes next to the transcript of Skylar's 2024 interview. I dragged the files from the hard drive, one by one, creating a digital breadcrumb trail of their theft. I worked all night. As the first gray light of dawn started to filter into the glass and steel house, I leaned back. I had a 20-page document, a meticulous, undeniable, and utterly damning timeline of the entire fraud. They had called me a historian, a relic, a keeper of dead things. They had no idea that a historian knows exactly how to bring the past back to life, and this ghost was about to haunt them all. This ghost was about to haunt them all. But a ghost needs a voice. I looked at the 20-page file, printed and sitting neatly on Richard's desk. I looked at the world's best mom mug, now empty. I had the evidence, but I wasn't a lawyer. I was a historian, and I needed an executioner. I picked up my phone and scrolled through contacts I hadn't touched in a decade. My finger hovered over a name, and I pressed call. 3 rings, and then a voice, sharp as a snapped ruler, cut through the silence. "Anne." Not, "hello." Just her name. "Anne, it's Ellie, Eleanor Vance." A beat of silence. "Ellie, my God, it's been, 15 years? I heard about Richard, I'm so sorry. I sent flowers, I don't know if you." "I'm flying to New York tomorrow, Anne. I need to see you. It's not about Richard's will. It's about my work." Another pause, shorter this time, colder. "Your work?" "Ellie, I'm an IP lawyer, not an estate lawyer." "I know exactly what you are, Anne," I said, my voice as level as her own. "You're the most ferocious copyright and intellectual property lawyer in New York, and I have a case for you. It's the one we used to talk about in the dorms. The what-if scenario. The line was silent. I could almost hear her thinking, recalibrating from grieving widow to potential client. "My office, tomorrow at 10, she said, and hung up. 24 hours later, I was in a cab, stuck in midtown traffic. The sterile, silent glass box of my house felt a million miles away. New York was loud and dirty and vibrantly, beautifully alive. I felt my own blood moving for the first time in days. I was carrying a single leather satchel. In it was the 20-page printout, the original blueprints, and the old, black hard drive. I hadn't let go of the bag since I left the house. Anne's firm, Lanier, Holt, and Spector, took up the top 3 floors of a glass tower that looked down on Central Park. Her office wasn't just a corner, it was a wedge of the building, with windows on 3 sides. It was designed to make you feel small, and there she was, Anne Lanier. She hadn't aged, she'd just been refined. She wore a severe dark gray suit that probably cost more than my car, her hair pulled back in a chignon so tight it looked painful. She was all sharp angles, just like the city outside. Ellie. She came around her massive, empty desk and gave me a brief, awkward hug. It was like hugging a marble statue. "You look well. Considering, you too, Anne." We sat. A paralegal brought in water. We were 2 women in our 50s who had once shared cheap beer and secrets in a dorm room. Now, we were separated by a chasm of 25 years and radically different choices. She was the CEO. I was the historian. I suddenly felt small, my simple black dress feeling frumpy and suburban. "So," she said, leaning back in her chair, "all business. What's this what-if case?" I didn't answer. I just opened my satchel. I took out the 20-page document and placed it in the center of her desk. I took out the rolled-up blueprints and set them next to it. Finally, I placed the clunky black hard drive on her desk blotter. She looked at the pile. "Ellie, this isn't show and tell. What am I looking at?" "You're looking at my graduate thesis, Project Ethel, dated 1998, I said, my voice steady. "And you're looking at the Architect of the Year museum that just won my late husband his last award. The one his new 25-year-old CEO, Skylar Vance, is claiming as her visionary design." Anne's eyebrow went up. "Just a fraction." She picked up the document. "You're alleging." "I'm not alleging anything," I said. "I'm showing you. Page 1 is my blueprint from 1998. Page 2 is their press photo from 2024. Page 3 is my academic theory from 1998. Page 4 is her interview transcript from last month. It's all there." She put on a pair of sleek, black-framed glasses and started to read. For 10 minutes, the only sound in that vast, sky-high office was the faint shush of paper turning. I just sat, my hands clasped in my lap, and waited. I watched her face. It was a mask of professional neutrality. She read every word. She unrolled the blueprints. She looked at the side-by-side photos. She got to the last page, turned it over as if expecting more, then set it down. She took off her glasses. She looked at the hard drive. Then she looked at me. The neutrality was gone. Her eyes were glittering, but not with sympathy. It was a cold, furious, intellectual fire. "He didn't just borrow it, Ellie," she said, her voice a low, dangerous hum. "He didn't just get inspired, he plagiarized your entire academic identity. He built a multi-million-dollar empire on a lie, and the foundation of that lie was you." She stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the park. This is the cleanest, most flagrant case of intellectual property theft I have ever seen. And the visionary girl, Skylar, she scoffed. "She's just a parrot. She's committing ongoing fraud every time she opens her mouth." She turned back to me, a slow, predatory smile spreading across her face. It was the smile of the shark that had just smelled blood in the water. "You said you didn't come here for an estate lawyer, and you were right," Anne said, walking back to her desk. She placed her hand on my 20-page document. "This isn't just a lawsuit, Ellie. This is a public execution. And they won't even see the blade coming." Anne was true to her word. The blade wouldn't be a messy public lawsuit right out of the gate. No. The first cut was surgical, quiet, and aimed at the one thing Skylar couldn't control, her own ego. I flew back from New York, not to the cold, sterile house I'd left, but to a command center. I sat in Richard's study, my study, and I waited. Anne's instructions were simple. Do nothing. Say nothing, Ellie. Let her build her own cage. An ego like that can't stand a vacuum. She'll fill it. So I waited. I watched. I drank my coffee from the world's best mom mug, the irony a small, private joke that tasted better than any expensive latte. I paid the bills. I sorted through Richard's things, not with grief, but with the cold detachment of an archaeologist. I boxed up his suits for goodwill. I filed his personal papers. I was no longer a widow in shock. I was a strategist, clearing the board. I was a historian, yes, but I was living in a primary source, and I was just gathering data. Anne, meanwhile, was working. She didn't plant a story. She just planted a seed. A few quiet calls to some old contacts in the media. A rumor that the real story behind the museum's design was even more visionary than anyone knew. A story that the new CEO was uniquely positioned to tell. She knew Skylar, drunk on her new power, would jump at the chance for a bigger spotlight. It took less than a week. The firm's PR team, now fully under Skylar's control, sent out a company-wide email blast. A new legacy. Skylar Vance's exclusive interview with Architectural Digest. I clicked the link. I opened the video on the giant, curved monitor in the study. The production was slick, beautifully lit, and there she was. Skylar, perched on the edge of the very desk I was sitting at, bathed in soft light. She was in my office, wearing a sharp, white suit, looking every bit the young, brilliant, untouchable visionary. The interviewer, a woman with a sharp bob and a fawning, admiring voice, was tossing her softball questions. "It must be overwhelming," the interviewer gushed, "to take the reins of such a legendary firm at such a young age, after such a tragedy." Skylar gave a small, brave, tragic smile. It's a profound responsibility. Richard was more than a boss. He was a mentor, my dearest friend. My entire focus now is just honoring his legacy. "And your collaborative bond," the interviewer said. "It was famously close. He called you his muse." "He did," Skylar said, her eyes glistening just right. We understood each other. We spoke the same creative language. We were building a new future for this firm, together." I had to give her credit. She was a hell of a performer. She talked about our vision. She talked about our plans for the Milan project. She even, and this is where I felt my stomach clench, talked about Leo. "And Leo, Richard's son, he's staying on." "Oh, absolutely," Skylar said, her voice warm and maternal. "Leo is he's family. He's incredibly talented, and I'm so thrilled to be guiding him, to be mentoring him as he steps into his father's shoes. We're the new guard, and he's a huge part of that." My son, her mentee, he wasn't a partner. He was a prop. The interview was almost over. It was a masterpiece of self-promotion, all fluff and no substance. I started to wonder if Anne's plan had failed. Then, the interviewer looked down at her notes, her expression changing to one of academic curiosity. "Just one last thing, Skylar. As the new creative head, you're obviously a student of history. Some. Very niche academic circles have pointed out that the structural brilliance of the atrium, the floating cantilevered design, bears a striking resemblance to a rather obscure graduate thesis from the late 92nds. Project Ethel, I believe it was called, by a doctor, Eleanor Vance. Any relation? I'm just curious." The trap was sprung. The camera was tight on Skylar's beautiful, confident face. Her smile didn't even flicker. She let out a small, airy, tinkling laugh. A laugh of pure, unadulterated condescension. The exact same laugh Leo had given me in the conference room. "Oh, wow," she said, blinking, as if the name was a charming, irrelevant surprise. That's a deep cut." "Eleanor Vance? Yes, of course. That's Richard's wife. A lovely woman." She leaned forward, her voice dropping into a confidential, slightly pitying tone, as if she were letting the world in on a sad little secret. I think she was some dusty old academic, a preservationist maybe. You know, one of those people who writes papers no one ever reads. Richard always said she was brilliant at history." The interviewer, primed by Anne, pressed just a little. "So, no connection to your work on the museum?" Skylar smiled, wide and beautiful and full of absolute certainty. Oh, heavens, no. My vision, our vision, it was entirely new. This was about the future. She waved her hand dismissively. Not some theory from a textbook. I just stared at the screen. My hands were perfectly still on the desk. She hadn't just denied it, she had despised it. She had publicly, arrogantly, and stupidly dismissed my entire professional identity as some dusty old academic and a theory from a textbook. She'd called me, the author, a lovely woman who was brilliant at history. She hadn't just walked into the trap, she had pulled the pin on her own grenade. I didn't even watch the rest. I just hit pause on her smiling, lying face. I downloaded a high-resolution copy of the entire interview. I attached the file to a new email. I sent it to Anne. The subject line was one word: checkmate. She thought she was giving a legacy interview. She had no idea she had just delivered a videotaped confession. A videotaped confession is only useful if the jury sees it. Anne's jury wasn't a courtroom. It was the board of directors and the firm's primary investors. She didn't leak the interview to the press. That would be messy. Instead, she sent a crisp, polite email to the 5 key stakeholders of the Milan project. She attached the Architectural Digest interview link and a courtesy copy of my 20-page evidence file. She just wanted, in her words, their expert opinion on the striking similarities before this becomes a public matter. It took less than 48 hours for the grenade to go off. The call for an emergency board meeting went out. I wasn't on the invite list, of course. I was just the historian. I was the grieving widow. I was the lovely woman who was good at history. But Anne, through her own network, got the time and place. Thursday, 3 p.m. Top floor. That afternoon I stood in my walk-in closet, the one Richard had designed. It was filled with soft cashmere, beige, gray, the uniform of a supportive, invisible wife. They all looked wrong. I reached to the very back, past the black morning dresses, and pulled out a suit I hadn't worn in 25 years. It was a dark, severe, navy blue wool. My old dissertation defense suit. It was armor. I put it on. It still fit perfectly. Anne was waiting for me in the lobby of the firm. She was wearing a crimson suit that was so sharp it could cut glass. She was a shark in her element. "Ready, Ellie?" she asked. I just nodded. I was carrying my leather satchel. Inside, my old, clunky hard drive and the rolled-up blueprints. We walked past the new, pink-haired receptionist. "Ma'am, Mrs. Vance, you can't. That's a private," she stammered, scrambling to her feet. Anne didn't even look at her. She just held up one hand, a quiet gesture of such absolute, ice-cold authority that the girl's voice just died in her throat. We didn't stop. We rode the elevator to the top floor in silence. The muffled, angry voices were audible before we even reached the glass conference room doors. We didn't knock. Anne pushed the door open. The room went instantly, shockingly silent. All of them were there. The gray-faced investors, the junior partners, and at the head of the massive, polished walnut table, Skylar. Her face was pale and blotchy, her visionary confidence gone, replaced by a pinched, furious expression. And next to her, looking terrified, was my son. One of the main investors, a man named Blackwood, was the first to speak. "Mrs. Vance, this is a private, urgent board meeting." Skylar found her voice. It was high and shrill. "Security! Get her out of here! This is trespassing!" "That won't be necessary, Miss Vance," Anne said. Her voice was calm and cut through the panic like a scalpel. She walked to the table and, with a heavy, deliberate thud, dropped a stack of thick, bound legal documents in front of Skylar. "You are hereby served," Anne said. Skylar's laugh was a high, panicked sound. "Served? You're suing me? For what? Hurting your feelings." "For fraud," Anne said simply. "For willful copyright infringement, unjust enrichment, and, well, for the systematic theft of an entire career. My clients." "This is insane! You can't prove a thing!" Skylar shrieked. Leo finally stood up, his chair scraping loudly. "Mom, you can't do this! This is ugly! You're ruining everything!" "Sit down, Leo," I said. My voice wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was the voice I hadn't used in decades. It was the professor voice, the voice that expected to be obeyed. And to my shock, and his, he froze, and then he slowly sat. While all eyes were on Anne and the lawsuit, I walked to the head of the table, to the main control panel for the projection screen. Skylar's own presentation was frozen on it, a slide titled Q4 Projections and New Branding. "What are you doing?" Skylar whispered, her eyes wide. "Get away from there." I ignored her. I plugged my old black hard drive into the system's USB port, the E-archive. The screen flickered. Her projections vanished. And then, click. My evidence file filled the giant 80-inch screen. On the left side, my 1998 blueprint, Project Ethel, black and white, academic, stark. On the right side, the glossy, full-color architectural digest photo of her museum atrium. I didn't say a word. I just let them look. The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear the air conditioning. I watched Blackwood, the investor, lean forward. He squinted. I heard him let out a low, slow, "Good God." I clicked to the next slide. On the left, my 1998 typed research notes with the phrase "structural honesty" as primary aesthetic underlined. On the right, the direct transcript from her interview with the exact same phrase. I clicked again. A side-by-side comparison of my load-bearing calculations and the firm's final engineering specs. It was a mirror. "This is slander." Skylar was on her feet, screaming now. "It's fake. It's a coincidence. It's an old, dusty college paper. You can't prove any of it." I looked at her. Her face was red, her mask of cool, visionary genius completely shattered. "You're right," I said quietly. "I can't prove it, but you can." I hit the final slide. It wasn't a document. It was the video file from Architectural Digest. I pressed play, and Skylar's own laughing, arrogant, beautifully lit face filled the screen. Her own voice filled the silent, horrified room. "Oh, wow," her voice echoed, tinny and false. "Some dusty old academic? A preservationist, maybe. Heavens no. My vision, our vision, was entirely new." I stopped the video. I let her smiling, lying face hang there on the screen, a monument to her own fraud. The silence was deafening. Blackwood was staring at her with pure, cold disgust. The other partners wouldn't even look at her. Skylar had collapsed back into her chair. Her face was ashen. She was looking at the investors, then at me, her mouth opening and closing with no sound. She had been publicly unmasked. Not by me. By herself. I finally looked at my son. Leo was staring at the screen, at my 1998 blueprint, his face a mask of dawning, sickening realization. He finally understood. He looked at me, his eyes wide, horrified. "Mom," he whispered. It was all true." I didn't give him the comfort of a reply. I just held his gaze. "You were right, Leo," I said, my voice quiet. "You're the new guard, but you forgot to check the foundation." Anne stepped forward, her voice crisp. "The lawsuit," she said to the stunned room, "is for all profits, damages, and a full, public retraction and reattribution of all works derived from Project Ethel, which by our estimation is roughly 85% of your firm's billings for the last 5 years. She looked at Blackwood. "We'll let you gentlemen decide how to handle her employment." And we turned, and we walked out. We left them in the ruins. We left them in the silence, with just the image of my 1998 thesis burning on the screen. The elevator ride down was silent. Not an awkward silence, but a profound one. It was the kind of quiet that follows a massive, deafening explosion when the air is still vibrating. Anne stood beside me, not looking at me, just staring at the brushed steel doors. As we stepped out into the cavernous marble and glass lobby, the air felt different. Thinner. I wasn't a ghost in this building anymore. Anne didn't say, "We won." She didn't congratulate me. She just gave me a single, sharp nod, a small, tight smile at the corner of her mouth. "It's done," she said. "Now, we let the dominoes fall." The first one fell before I had even finished my first cup of coffee the next morning. I was in the study, my study, watching the sun rise. It was the first time I'd ever sat in that house and felt like I actually belonged there. The glass walls didn't feel like a cage. They felt like a cockpit. I was drinking from the world's best mom mug, the irony feeling less like a joke and more like a private, bitter truth. I had been a world-class mom. I'd just forgotten to be anything else. The phone rang. The caller ID said, Blackwood Investments. I let it ring twice, then picked up. Eleanor Vance. Mrs. Vance. Dr. Vance. Eleanor. He sounded. Wrecked. Exhausted. I am calling on behalf of the board. I want to offer my most profound, my deepest apologies. We held an emergency vote last night. After your presentation. I waited. I just listened to him stumble. Skylar Vance's employment has been terminated, effective immediately, he said, the words coming out in a rush. The board is horrified. We were misled. We were complicit. Terminated. A simple clinical word for a total annihilation. I looked at the world's best mom mug. Thank you for informing me, Mr. Blackwood, I said, my voice perfectly even. And about the lawsuit, Dr. Vance, he stammered. The firm. We are prepared to make this right. Whatever, Miss Lanier. Anne will be in touch with you, I said, and hung up. I didn't feel joy. I didn't pump my fist in the air. I just felt a stillness, a deep, cold, quiet sense of order. The historian had just corrected the official record. The other dominoes fell so fast it was almost comical. Anne hadn't needed to leak a thing. The investors, terrified of the Milan contract blowing up and their own stock tanking, had done it for her. They threw Skylar to the wolves to save themselves. The first article to hit wasn't a rumor, it was a retraction. Architectural Digest, in a move of pure journalistic panic, put it right on their homepage. The headline was brutal. The Vance Scandal. Architectural Digest retracts visionary story amid shocking allegations of massive intellectual property theft. They printed my name, Dr. Eleanor Vance. They talked about Project Ethel. They even posted a low-resolution scan of my old faculty photo, the one with the short hair and the confident, annoying smile, right next to Skylar's glossy visionary portrait. Then the industry blogs took over. Skygate, how Skylar Vance plagiarized her way to the top. The ghost in the machine, the dusty academic who built Vance architecture. I even saw a grainy, long-lens photo on a gossip site. It was Skylar. She was leaving the back entrance of the firm, not in one of her sharp white power suits, but in gray sweatpants and a hoodie, her face hidden by sunglasses. She was carrying a single brown cardboard box. The American corporate walk of shame. It was a cliché, but seeing it, it was the realest thing I'd seen all week. Anne called me that afternoon. The firm didn't even counter Ellie, she said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. They folded. Completely. They are settling for the full amount. She told me the number. It wasn't a number. It was a dynasty. It was back pay, she said, for 25 years of creative services, plus interest. It was so much money it felt like a typo. I just looked around the cold glass and steel house Richard had built. I had spent decades living on a generous household allowance, the kind of money a man gives his dependent. I had worried about liquidity when he died. Now I could buy the whole damn building. The money wasn't the point, but it was the proof. It's the American way of keeping score, and the historian had just run the board. And Skylar? I asked, my voice quiet. Fired, Anne said, and the ethics board is opening a full investigation. She'll lose her license. She'll be lucky if she can get a job designing a garage in Omaha. She's done, Ellie, she's been corrected. But none of that, not the money, not the firing, not the scandal was the real victory. The real correction came a month later. Blackwood called me again. His voice was different this time, humble, respectful. The board, he said, in a very public, very desperate act of atonement, wanted to make one final gesture. They wanted to know if I would attend. I drove to the museum, my museum. There was a small crowd, not a gala, just a few reporters, the board members in their funereal suits, and a work crew. They were gathered by the main entrance, right under the massive floating glass atrium. My atrium. Blackwood saw me get out of the car and practically ran over. Dr. Vance, thank you. Thank you so much for coming. He gestured to the large limestone wall at the entrance, the small, tasteful, almost invisible bronze plaque that had read, "The Vance Atrium was gone." In its place, the work crew was just finishing the installation of a new one. It was massive. It was loud. It was unmissable. I walked closer, my shoes clicking on the granite. The workmen stepped aside. I didn't need to read it. I already knew what it said, but I had to see it. The Dr. Eleanor Vance Center for Structural Studies original project Ethel, 1998. My name, my full name, my title, my project, my date. It was carved in bronze, 6 inches high, set in stone. I reached out and touched the letters. They were cold and sharp and impossibly real. Richard had built his legacy on my work, called it his own, and then tried to pass it to his muse. But a historian knows that history isn't just the past. It's the permanent record, and in the end, my name was the one on the wall. The foundation was finally and publicly mine. But a public correction is one thing. A private one is something else entirely. Even with my name carved in bronze and my bank account refilled, there was still a ruin. The one my son and I had made of each other. I sold the glass and steel house. I sold it, and all the awards, and all the sterile, minimalist furniture. I didn't want the tomb. I wanted a life. 3 months later, I was sitting in an office that was gloriously, wonderfully mine. It was small and cramped and smelled of old books and floor wax. I had taken a guest professorship at my old university, back in the same department where I'd once been the rising star. My old World's Best Mom mug was on the desk, but it was sitting on a stack of academic journals, filled with cheap, scalding hot coffee from the faculty lounge. I was elbows deep in a set of new plans, a pro bono project for a downtown community center, and I was, for the first time in 30 years, completely happy. There was a knock on my open door. Not a confident, sharp rap. A hesitant, almost not there tap. I looked up. "Come in," and there he was. Leo. He stood in the doorway, and my breath just stopped. He wasn't the sharp, suited-up, new guard kid from the firm. His 15% junior partnership had been contingent on Skylar's leadership. When she was fired for cause, his contract was instantly voided. He was broke, and he looked it. He was thinner, his hair was too long, and he was wearing an old pair of jeans and a faded university sweatshirt. He looked like any other lost, 20-something student on campus. He just looked young. He was holding something in his hands, clutched to his chest like a shield. It was a book. A tattered, dog-eared paperback. My eyes focused. I knew that cover. It was the original, 1999 University Press edition of my thesis, Structural Honesty in Public Spaces. My heart didn't leap, it just ached. "Mom," he said. His voice was hoarse. He didn't move from the doorway, as if he knew he didn't have the right to come in. "Leo," I said. My voice was even. Not forgiving, not angry, just waiting. He just stood there for a long, awful second, the silence of the library hallway stretching between us. Then he finally looked up, and his eyes met mine. They were red-rimmed. The arrogance, the pity, the condescension. It was all gone, burned away. I bought this," he said, holding up the book, "from a used bookstore online. After I read it." He took a shaky breath. "I read it all. 3 times. He stepped into the room. 1 step. "Mom, I didn't understand." He wasn't just talking about the lawsuit. He was talking about everything. "I believed him," he whispered, his voice cracking. "All those years, I idolized him. He told me you were brilliant, but not practical. That you were a theorist, he let me believe. He let me believe he was the genius, and you were just the historian. He let us both believe that, Leo," I said quietly. "No." He shook his head, a single hot tear finally spilling over and rolling down his cheek. He wiped it away angrily. "No, I let me believe it. Because it was easier. Because Skylar was the future, and you were just. Mom." He stopped, finally standing in front of my desk. He looked at my work, the new blueprints spread out, the red pen in my hand. He looked at the World's Best Mom mug. "I am so sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry, Mom." That was the word I was waiting for. Mom, not historian. He held up my tattered 20-year-old book. His hands were shaking. This is the only thing that makes sense anymore. Everything else, everything he taught me, it was all just a skin. It was just glass and steel, covering up, nothing. He looked at me, his eyes desperate, his new guard confidence totally shattered, leaving just the raw, unfinished apprentice. Candy, you teach me?" he asked, his voice breaking on the words. "For real this time? From the beginning?" I want to learn the foundation." I looked at my son, this broken, humbled man who was finally seeing me. Not as the woman who made his dinner, but as the woman who'd written the book. I took a long, slow breath. I closed the journal I'd been writing in. I took my tattered, dog-eared copy of that same book from my own shelf and placed it on the desk between us. Then, I slid a blank legal pad and a sharpened pencil across the desk, stopping them right in front of him. "All right, apprentice," I said. "Pull up a chair. We'll start with Chapter 1. "All right, apprentice," I said. "Pull up a chair. We'll start with Chapter 1. And we did. We started from the beginning, not just with him but with me. Today, I'm standing on the third-floor scaffolding of what used to be a forgotten, fire-gutted downtown library. Now, it's a construction site. The air doesn't smell like lemon polish and old paper. It smells like sawdust, welding, and wet concrete. I'm not polishing someone else's trophies. I'm wearing a hard hat, and the logo on the side, Vance Preservation and Design, is mine. Down below, I can see Leo. He's not the new guard kid in a suit. He's in boots and jeans, leaning over a set of blueprints with the structural engineer, and he's pointing to a load-bearing wall. He's arguing, but he's also listening. He's learning the foundation. He's finally learning how to build something that lasts. My assistant hands me a new set of plans, a new project. I unroll them. They all thought my best work was in the past. They called me a historian as an insult, a keeper of dead things. They were so busy trying to build their future, they forgot that the only way to build something new is to have a foundation that's real. I look up, past the steel beams at the city skyline. The truth is, I'm just getting started. My story is about what happens when you're dismissed, discarded, and told your contributions don't matter. It's about realizing that your identity is not what someone calls you, it's what you build. So let me ask you, if the world tried to erase your name, would you have the courage to pick up the pen and carve it back in, this time in stone? If this story resonated with you, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every one, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about finding your strength and rewriting the ending.